is the fourth workshop. This is about landowner outreach. And Drew is unfortunately not able to make it today, so Rob was thankful enough to step in. So if you have any questions, again, we're both here to help answer them. Again, we all know each other. We're going to go over the workshop review stuff. Different things we're going to cover is just, a quick overview of all the previous workshops. And then we're going to really jump into, how to present this material for producer engagement maps. So we're just going to kind of skip introductions. We've all been here. We all kind of know each other now. Again, just some quick background. So just really want to iterate the IAPA is integrated ACPF data. So we've heard that acronym before, with PTMap data, which we've heard that acronym before. So these two different data sets that we're putting together. Again, the goals of this workshop is to get that landowner outreach. So we've been through webinar 1, which was, what is the IAP data, kind of covered that. Webinar 2 was really targeting those data practices. So how are we, pulling different data sets to look at things that are going to meet our goals for different locations on our landscape. And then webinar 3, which was Friday, went through, the investment guide. Where is the best bang for your buck? Now that we've targeted practices, how do we really pull those and what are we looking for there? And then this last one is the landowner outreach, and we'll cover all that. Primary goals is, with this, we're setting realistic outcomes and expectations of this data. So throughout this whole process, this is what we've been trying to do. We've been looking at either edge of field or resource points. So really taking the two main different data sets that are in this PTMap ACPF data to really look for how does this work best for the needs in our watershed. Again, quick overview of the ACPF data, PTMap data, getting your cost benefits and targeted practices with that. Just wanted to hit on this real quick again. There is lots of information out there. We will be sending these PDFs, these PowerPoints out as PDFs so you can get these links, but really, dig into these and use them because there is a lot of documentation out there on how this data is put together, what it means and what's behind it. And as we've seen, there is a lot of data. So really use this and take advantage of the materials that are out here to help guide you in your decisions. Again, we've seen this before, the ACPF, PTMap data, the outputs. We've seen this big messy tables of what the data looks like, different things that come out of PTMap or ACPF. And again, for this, we're going to focus on the two priority resource points, 60 and 61, which are in those main watersheds that we've been focusing on throughout the whole time. Kind of just a quick review of the webinar on Friday. So please stop me if you guys have any questions on that. I know there was a lot of information there that Drew went over. So as you've kind of had the weekend to think about this and let this resonate in, if you have any questions, let me know. But again, just a quick cover, we went through, where are our return on investments best? Where is like TN on this map, where is to the resource point, where is the low, medium, high, where is the best bang for your buck? We went through those targeted practices and then through those targeted practices, which ones are your best return on investment. And again, showing the, the peak discharge or the live storage, that information is also within there. So something else to really look for where the best bang for your buck is, for the water quantity instead of water quality. And then really looking at all those different benefits, in a table format. So that's something easy to relate to and people can kind of make decisions, based upon that. So, there was a lot of information there that went through on Friday, but really it boils down to those, you know, top 3 things, and all that data is in there, and you can pull it out into that map that we saw versus these numbers that we have. So I'm just going to pause real quick to see if anybody has any questions on what the webinar was on Friday.
I just have a quick comment that I think Drew made this pretty clear, but just worthy of a reminder that the cost information that's kind of emphasized here is life cycle cost, not the construction cost that most of us work with the most. Is, you know, what does it take to get the thing built is where most of our watershed plans and discussions focus. And so that is a bit of a paradigm shift to think of pricing and planning on the life cycle cost. Just my 2 cents.
Yes, thank you, Jim, for that.
Just to follow up there and echo that comment, I'm going to say for a lot of those construction costs, you do have an estimate for what the cost per storage per acre foot is, or cubic yard, or whatever the construction cost might be. And so between ACPF and PTMAP, a good amount of that storage volume is included. So you are able to back end some of those estimates using some of that storage information as well.
Okay, good.
All right, any other questions? Okay, hearing none, we'll move on. And if you guys do think of anything as we're going through, like I said, feel free to jump in and be happy to answer your questions. All right, so kind of jumping into the main topic of today's webinar is, you know, these producer engagement maps. Materials that we are going to format to get these what we call land information packets. So we're looking at specific field locations or parcel locations to basically create a set of standard of maps to really help engage the landowner and give them information that can help maybe persuade them to do a particular BMP. And so with that, we'll kind of just jump right in. So when I'm talking land information maps, this is kind of what I'm talking about here. We have, you know, a field boundary or a parcel boundary that is basically just displaying, you know, a particular field and what's going on that field. In the map here, we also show, just to help for reference, the whole Middle Cedar watershed, and then our area of interest here, and within that area of interest, where we're located. So just to help give some reference to the landowner, like we're in this small little field here, but here we are in the big scheme of things. And you can have bigger ones, smaller ones. I mean, it really depends on what you're trying to relay to the landowner. Some other basic information is things like flow lines, you know, where is the water actually flowing, to help the farmer, you know, see like, oh yes, this is water is flowing to the south, it's flowing to this, you know, little stream here or something. Really kind of helps give a visual of what is going on that landscape. And another thing is aerial imagery, right? It's always nice to have really good aerial imagery to really see what's going on in that field. And there's a lot of good stuff out there. Sometimes it's, you know, older or newer, depending on where you are. You might have a specific county that you're in that has really good aerial imagery that you could use. But that's really, you know, up to what data is available. All right, so how do we get this data? How do we even set up these? Now, just in ArcMap, so we have, you know, the different 10 series, right? We have 10.5, 10.6, 10.7, 10.8 now. But in the ArcMap series, they have what's called data-driven pages, which is just a simple way to kind of set up an index layer to quickly go through these. So you're not making these maps one individual layer at a time. But if you go into what the new thing is ArcPro, they call data-driven pages map series. So it has the same concepts, but there's just a lot more different capabilities in Pro, but I know not a lot of people are on Pro yet. It does look a little scary. It's completely different and new. But if you are an adventurer and want to go try it, I highly suggest it. There's a lot of really cool things with that. But for the sake of this webinar, we'll be focusing on the ARC map series and data-driven pages. All right, so what's in data-driven pages? Like I said, it's pretty simple. Basically, you're going into and you're going to enable the data-driven page. You want to select the data frame that you're going to be using, which is probably just your main map page. And then you have to set up an index of some kind. So you're setting up either the field boundaries that come out of ACPF, for example. We've had other clients use parcel data, which can get complicated sometimes too, but sometimes have better boundaries. You could see multiple farm units on one, area that's all under one landowner instead of just a small area. And we'll get into that a little more later on. Then you're basically just setting up some attributes within that index. So we have these as the field name, which is that unique ID that you're using for your index. So these are from the ACPF farm unit data. So we're just using that unique farm unit IDs because it has to have a unique ID for each page because that's how it goes through and sorts through different things. And I usually just set up the name field, the sort field, and the page number all with that same. So these are the main ones that you need to set up for that. The other tab is the extent. Now there's several different ways that you can use this. The main thing I like to use is the best fit. So it's basically taking your page and looking at the percent size, either if it's 100%, it's all the way down as close as it can get to that boundary box. If you do like 115% that I have here, it will zoom out slightly so you can see more around your map. And I'll show the difference with that. You also have the center scale. So you can set the scale within the map and then say, hey, retain that scale that you already have set. So I've had clients that are like, yeah, we want 84,000 or 12,000 set scale, or 1 inch equals 600 feet set scale, or what it may be. You can set that in there and it will make sure it maintains that as it goes through. The other thing you can set is to actually have an attribute table in the index that says this is what scale you can set it to. So we do a lot of D-firm flood maps and they have specific scales that they need to be set to. So we set that scale within there. So when it goes through the pages, it automatically goes and sets to that scale. So you have a bunch of different options. Like I said, mainly the best fit is the best. Yes, Jim.
See, Clark and Jeff joined us. If it doesn't throw you too much off your rhythm, I wonder if you could kind of recap the new material to kind of get them oriented as to where you are.
Yes. So we can go back a couple things here. So again, producer engagement maps, we're going to be going over how to create these maps to basically give some farm owners land information about their own. The main things we want to look at are field boundaries, so whether it be parcel boundaries or the field boundaries that come from ACPFs, just some sort of index scale that we can create these off of. Aerial imagery and other flow lines and things like that are important to kind of show what's going on the landscape. Other things to consider are these different inset maps to show where you are on the landscape. And as you go through these data-driven pages, it can change and shift to show where you're at. Like we were going through before, the main thing we want to look for is the different things going on within data-driven pages. ARC Map has data-driven pages. ARC Pro, which is the newest, latest, and greatest Esri product, has what's called Map Series. Now, Map Series has all the same functionality as data-driven pages, but lots more different things. Like you can add tables, you can add charts, you can do all sorts of things, but ArcPro looks 100% different from ArcMap. So if you're not familiar with it, it will take some time to get used to. For the sake of this webinar, we're going to be sticking with ArcMap just because I think most people are familiar with that. Again, data-driven pages, you got to enable them, set up what layer you want, and then set up what index layer you want. For our sake, we chose the field boundaries for the main areas that we're looking for the priority resource point 60 and 61, because that's what we had focused on. We were grabbing all the data from the past webinar, so we're going to look at moving that data into this now. Here's the main points of interest that you need to make sure you fill out. I would stay away from the rotation and other things like that. That gets a little wonky if you start messing with that. And again, the extent is the view of your map. How much are you looking at? Are you looking at 100% of the size? Are you setting the scale within the map, or do you have a scale already set within the attribute table? Some other cool options that you have within data-driven pages, once you set that up, you have within the data frame properties itself, and we'll go through and explain all this in the live demo, is you have what's called exclude layers. So you can clip layers down to the main index that you're showing. So if there's something that you do not want to show outside, you really want to focus on that map, you can go through and say, okay, I want to clip everything, but the layers I want to make sure I want to show the ortho imagery. So I want that to show within the whole map. If I didn't have that checked, then it would clip it out and you would only see the aerial imagery within the bounding box that we have set. So here's a good example. So we set the layer for the existing BMPs that we have in here, and it clipped it to this polygon, which is our index layer that we have set up. So there is this BMP that's outside, but because we clipped it, you don't see anything outside that. You only see stuff within this polygon. So just something to keep in mind. If you didn't clip it, you would see everything else outside the whole thing. So it's nice because if you're trying to focus on this particular piece, you don't want to see, you know, BMPs outside that. That's going to take away your focus from this particular landscape. So with that, I'm going to kind of quick jump into a demo here just to kind of walk through a lot of this different information. So as I'm going through this, if you have any questions, again, please feel free. I know there's a lot of data here, so. All right. So if you kind of remember from the presentation on Friday that Drew gave, this is basically his map, right? He had his economic data here. He had his quantity live storage data. He had the source assessment and some other information. So we're just going to take all of his information that him and Rachel did. We want to bring that into these maps. So how do we set this up now? So first of all, the main thing is you want to get the toolbar. So main thing you're going to do is right click, and you want to go through and see where data-driven pages are. So you want to get that toolbar. Once you have that, you can see it here, basic tools. This is where you want to start setting it up. So this is where we really start going into it now. We want to enable the data-driven pages. I have just one data frame layer, so I want to set that one. I want to set it to the field boundaries that we used. And I want the unique identifier for the name field, sort field, and for the page numbers. Next, we'll go to the extent. This is how it usually comes in as 125. I usually like 110 or 115. Again, you could set the round to the nearest scale to maintain the current extent, which is here. So if I check this one here, which center and maintain current scale, it would maintain this current scale that I have up in the bar up here. So this is where you set your scale for the map. So if I did that, it would always show the same scale. It would go to each different page, but it would show that big wide extent. And then again, if you have a scale set in the actual attribute table, you can do that too, and it will run through that and make sure it sets to that scale. So we're going to do this one, and we're going to say OK. So now it's going to go through and calculate and just basically put all these into their own little index. And depending on how big of an area you are, this shouldn't take too long. Right now you can see, well, it doesn't look like anything happened. There it goes. It's going to pop up. So we can see where this is at now. This is number 1. So what you want to do is look at this attribute table that's up here. So this is what it's feeding off of. So you have all these field identifiers that it's going through each one of these. And the neat thing is you can right click here and say go to page, and it will go to this one that you just clicked on. Well, that wasn't a very good one. Let's try a different one. So you can see it's bouncing around to the different pages that you have. And if you highlight them, you can see which one it is. So it's showing this one on the edge here. Let's try to find a little better one in the middle. Oops. Well, this one will work. So you can see here we have it all set, so it's ready to go through. It's going through each page. Once we have that set, we can go through and look at the exclude layers we want to do. So you're going to right click on the layers, go to properties, and you're going to go into this data frame tab. So right now here we want to go down to this part where it's clip options, and we want to clip to the data driven page extent. So once it has that, we're going to then go through and say, okay, which ones do we want to actually see to that extent? So I'm going to turn everything off. So if I have everything set like this, everything is going to be clipped down to that particular extent. If I want the hill shade and the orthophoto, so everything else that doesn't have a check is going to be clipped except for the orthophoto. So we're going to close that and say OK. And this will come up if your coordinate systems are different. That's fine, just click yes. So now you can see it clipped everything, including, so this must have been the Huck boundary that Drew had, so that was clipped out. The flow lines, you can see that was clipped out. So it kind of goes to show, well, maybe I don't want the flow lines clipped out of that, so I want to make sure that goes. So I'm going to go back in, go back to exclude layers, and I'm going to say, okay, I want the NHD, and I want the watershed boundary. So I click OK. So now you can see the watershed boundary is there and the flow lines are there. Everything else is clipped. Now, if I turn on some of these layers, so for the all practices, I'm going to refresh my map here. Oops, let's see, let's do these ones here. And again, if you have aerial photos or anything like that, it will slow you down sometimes. So these ones are the targeted groups. So you can see we don't see anything in here because we didn't have anything targeted within this polygon. So I want to go to, and I'm just going to zoom out to this particular thing, and we're going to select a field that actually has that target layer within it, which is not showing up. And this is what I get for using Drew's map.
Yeah, so just thinking back to Friday for Drew's reference, what he was looking at here was practices that had greater than 10 pounds of nitrogen reduction. and then also 4 pounds of total phosphorus reduction. And if I recall correctly, that was also specific to wetlands. So already there's not very many wetlands, or I forget if it was all practice or just wetlands. The two examples are blending in my mind right now, but yeah, so the greater than 10 pounds N and greater than 4 pounds TP are what those are referencing.
So my material doesn't, live demos, don't you love them? So I'm just going to go in quick because I know where this data is, and I'm going to add it in. So I always have our catalog open because I'm constantly going back into it, which is probably a good thing sometimes. So I'm just going to quickly add in all practices for 0.60. And I am going to quickly, I know what's wrong. I'm going to exclude that layer. That's why I can't see it. So I'm going to exclude all those. There we go. So since I had that exclude on, I couldn't see anything except for the one little parcel that was showing. So now that I can see these, I'm going to one more time go back and say exclude the actual boundaries so we can see. All right, so we have a couple of different options that we can go in to do. So I'm going to pick this one if it's selectable. Pardon me one moment here. The main thing you always want to make sure is whatever you have selected here is, you know, what's going to be selected, and sometimes you can get multiple things going on at once, which can give you a headache. So now that I have that selected, I'm going to open this up. So I have this one particular feature. I'm going to go zoom to that particular location. Okay, so now that we have this going on, we can see within the map here, so I have nothing being excluded. So everything you can see outside the boundary, outside here, you can see everything within this area. If I want to go back and exclude all this stuff going on outside, I just go back in, say exclude, and turn off that layer. So now it's only showing whatever is in that particular field boundary. Trying to think if there's anything. I think that's mainly it. This is your setup. If you go into your actual map now, you can set up everything within here. And once you have everything set up, and we'll go through this after the next PowerPoint, you can click through these and go to each page, and each page is going to be different depending on how you have your layout set up. So I guess with that, that was kind of a lot to go through. Is there any other questions on this before I jump back? All right, with that, with silence means I will continue on. So I'm going to bring up my PowerPoint again, and we'll go back into this. So now that we know how to set up the data-driven pages, we want to go into what data do we actually want to display. Well, it really depends on what you're trying to, portray to the landowners. Are you, some basic information like we talked about, where water is flowing, where BMPs are, what those BMPs are, and then some basic information about those practices. But also different things like slope or soil texture can sometimes be a big help. Having that map in hand, you can go talk to the farmer and confirm, hey, this is what we think is going on. Is that really, and start up that conversation with that farmer, because the one thing you want to definitely do is make sure you do your homework before you go out and talk to that farmer. Make sure you know what's going on in their land, because they definitely know what's going on in their land. So you don't want to go present something to them without having those basic facts and information, because if you have something wrong, he's going to tell you and he's not going to work with you. So really do your research on the particular landowner. So if you already have, you know, some landowners in mind, make sure to go to them, excuse me, and, you know, have that information that makes sense. You don't want to display something that is kind of totally out of the blue, out of the ordinary. Some other information is, you know, data pulled from the actual IAPA data. So we have reduction of nitrogen. So we're showing in this map here the actual BMP, what it is. It's nutrient removal wetland, and it's reducing, you know, a high level amount of nitrogen in that area. So if the farmer is willing, you know, if we could put a little wetland in here, that would remove a ton of nitrogen for that particular priority resource point. Excuse me. So some of this go ahead.
Previous slide.
Yep.
The brown was drainage water management in kind of odd shaped strips. I just kind of curious about that relative to typical drainage water management systems, or am I misinterpreting that?
So it could be a combination of things. It's right now we don't really have a boundary with it, so this could be a couple of different practices that look like they're all one. This data came out of the ACPF data, so whatever is going on behind the scenes of why that data was pulled out, you know, that's something that maybe you need to look at and refine. Like if this doesn't make sense, that would definitely be something to look into. Hey, maybe we don't want to display that, you know, because that's not going to make sense to that farmer, but we want to display, you know, this nutrient removal wetland. So I know Rob is definitely more the expert on the ACPF and how it makes this stuff. So Rob, do you have any further comments?
I was just going to chime in there, Jim. Yeah, this is a good reason as to why a gut check is needed for the drainage water management for ACPF. My recollection is that it's primarily based upon slope and soils. And so you're seeing that slope break within field, and it's meeting the minimum surface area, and it's meeting the minimum area requirement. So it's the way drainage water management's identified in ACPF. So it's a good gut check as to whether or not something may actually be feasible on the ground. If this is somebody that you're looking to do prioritized outreach with, it may make sense to go in and potentially exclude that practice.
Okay, cool, thanks.
All right, yeah, and we'll kind of get into a little bit more about this information and how to, you know, pick and choose what you're going on. So where to find a lot of this information? A lot of this is from the PTMAP database. A lot of it's from ACPF, but here's some quick options that we've had a lot of other clients wanting to use. So we have what's called the sedmass flow. So it's sediment delivered to the catchment outlet. That's a good one. A lot of people like to see, you know, where sediment is coming from, how much is going through. Like Rob mentioned, slope. It's a good one. The stream power index, a lot of people like to use that one for grass waterways. You know, what's really going on? Is that making sense? Some different things from the Sergo layer. So the crop productivity index, I think in Iowa, it's the corn productivity index, or, you know, something similar to that. And, you know, things like the hydrosoils group, you know, just what is going on that land? Is there goods? What type of soils are there? So some different things to, you know, think about displaying is all within the data that you guys have already. So a lot of different options to choose from. It's just kind of thinking through, what is it that we're trying to get out of these farmers? What are we trying to produce and show them? And what will they actually be willing to work with? What information makes sense to them? Some other things, we did the existing practices that throughout the whole middle cedar. So when we got those, you know, we know where a lot of contour buffer strips are, grass waterways, ponds, terraces, strip cropping, wascobs. We know where a lot of people are already doing good practices. That data was run through the whole middle cedar watershed, and you have all that data. If you don't, let me know, we can get it to you. but you can take what's going on those landscapes, and these farmers already are doing stuff, you know, so you can pull out different information that is already existing and seeing, okay, this farmer is, you know, doing X, Y, Z, so we can see grass waterways, and that's, you know, removing so much phosphorus or so much nitrogen, or, you know, different things that are going on. What are they already doing? Hey, let's give them credit for that. So another thing is, if this farmer is already doing that, well, then maybe I don't want to outreach to them because they're already doing good stuff. So let's go on to the next farmer. Hey, what's this guy doing over here? Well, he's not doing as much. Maybe that's something to reach out. Hey, your neighbor's doing that. Would you maybe consider, you know, adding to his grass waterway that he has through this field here, you know? So different things to consider, you know, how to reach out, because we know a lot of farmers are doing a lot of good things out there. So, you know, something to acknowledge that and show that to a farmer, saying, we know you're doing good things. So the maps can get pretty busy with a lot of the IAPA practices. So this is kind of a quick map of what's going on with all the ACPF data. There's a bunch of different things going on here. Maybe you don't want to show all this stuff. Maybe you are knowing that farmers in this particular area only want to see a nutrient removal wetland, or they only want to see some riparian functions, or they only want to see a grass waterway. So, you know, those are different things that you can think about. Well, maybe we don't display everything. Maybe we only display the ones that we know that they're going to participate in. Because, you know, once you see this map, it can get pretty messy. There's a lot of different options that can going on here. And we know we're not going to put on every single one of these practices, right? So what makes it the most sense? Which ones, as we went through and targeted, and went through the return on investment, which one of these actually makes sense to put on there due to all that. So different things to kind of start considering and thinking through what you're actually going to be showing and portraying, because I wouldn't go to a farmer and say, hey, we got lots of options, what do you want to do? You know, that can get pretty confusing pretty easily. So again, kind of just pointing out that, you know, when Rachel went through and pulled a lot of the data from the different IAPA practices, we went through this table BA load red, shows out that priority resource point 60, you know, and went back and joined that data. So that's a lot of the stuff that we went through in the last few webinars is what's going to help you make these maps in the end. Because then we can go on different things and display, okay, we got these targeted practices right now. So what else do we want to show and display with them? Well, okay, yes, you got the practice on the field. Well, what information can you give the farmer about that practice? Do we want to show the reduction of nitrogen? Do we want to show the return on investment the way Drew had showed us? You know, there's so much data in here. What do they care about? Do they care about nitrogen? Maybe they care about sediment. Maybe they care about phosphorus. You know, so we have all that information. We can put these different layers together to really focus and show what's going on in the landscape and show that farmer, hey, this nutrient removal wetland, that'll give us a lot of bang for our buck, and we'll get a lot of, you know, nitrogen removed out of the landscape, and that'll really help us meet, you know, whatever goal we're setting towards. So different things to consider through this. So some different ways to get that data, you know, it's just a lot of displaying the symbology, right? It's going through that data and classifying it, using graduated symbols, looking at how you want to display, like, is there a particular set range that you know is the sweet spot that we really want to focus on? Maybe you keep all this away and you have that specific layer and have a star there. Hey, these are the ones that are the best. We really want to show that. And you can set all those different ranges and, you know, change that throughout to show these maps. So that kind of brings us back to, you know, this map here and how we can display those different things. So I think, yep. So with that, I will go into quick demonstration. And as I'm going through these topics here and showing this on the ArcMap side of things, please stop me, let me know if you have any questions on this.
Yeah, Kaya, so Jeff had a comment in the chat box. Should a landowner reject the type of practice highlighted by the software but be willing to consider an alternative? Can we manually change the priority resource at one site and recalculate the benefits? So a couple different questions there.
Yeah, so I mean, there's several different options with that. I mean, yes, what Rachel and Drew were showing, was going towards the priority resource point, right? So somewhere down along the stream we want to show. You also have the option within, the data set here to look just specifically, at this field, at the small catchments, these 40-acre catchments that are given to you through PTM app, that you can say, hey, if this is a small catchment here, well, let's just look at what the benefits are, coming off the small one. And that information is all within the PTM app database. It's just in a different table. So it's not looking at something down the line here, but looking at direct benefits right off the field edge. So that's one option that you can use. I mean, another thing is too, I think a lot of it is knowing what the farmers out there kind of already want before you even, go out there and give them this information. Because, like you said, you might know a particular farmer and they might be totally willing to do something, but they are not going to do a nutrient removal wetland. There is just no way. So are there other options on this field? We saw that image before that had all those different options. Well, maybe we kind of look at one of those different options and only show that to that farmer, and have that discussion of, hey, yeah, there's other options out there, but we know you really want to do a grass waterway through here. So let's talk about how we can get that done for you. So, it's not just making these maps and showing it to the farmers. It's kind of already knowing what the farmers want, which I know is hard in some cases, but the other thing to think about too is if you have people that just come in, off the street into your office, they're like, hey, I got something, I want to do something on, my farm. I want to put in a practice of some kind. Maybe you then do show them every option available. Be like, well, hey, we know a lot of different things you can do here. What are you looking for? We can do a grass waterway. We can do nutrient removal wetland. We can, do something else. So that's an option too of, if there's willing to come into you, well, maybe show them everything, talk them through. Well, hey, this one's going to get a good bang for your buck, so maybe we should focus on that. A lot of it is you have different scenarios with these farmers, right? So you have the one coming in, yeah, maybe show them everything, work with them. The ones that are more resistant, they're only going to do grass waterways. Well, then only show them grass waterways. Show them what options you have, which ones are the best bang for your buck. It's really hard, and it's dependent on, what relationships you already have with the landowners. So I hope that answered your question. I feel like as we keep doing more of these, we're finding out more and more what some areas people want, something completely different than, what we have here.
Jeff just chimed in with a thank you. I answered his question.
Okay. All right, so kind of jumping in here, we have a lot of different things going on within this. I brought in, these existing practices that we can show what's going on within this area. We have the different targeted practices that, Rachel and them pulled out. So I just want to quick focus on them. So what I have set up here, which I set up my layout, to get kind of all the information that I can in as much as possible. I like to have these inset maps to show, what's going on within this particular field. And then I set up my, my index here. So I have the targeted practices. There's a couple different things that you can do. Sometimes I have a lot of practices, but they're only showing like on one particular field, they might only show 3 options, but you might have 20 options, right? So sometimes I check, you know, this extent here to say, okay, only show the classes within that. So then that minimizes what I'm looking at within this. So you just have a couple of different things that you can play with when you're setting up your index on this. The main thing to go through is you just kind of double click on it to go to the properties, and you can set your style, you can change all your different things, you know, so basic ArcMap stuff. You just kind of have to play with it with which best fits with your map. So how did I get to these? So I have, you know, these targeted practices. Well, I wanted the ones with reduction of nitrogen. So I'm just going to quick show you here. This is coming from a source where it's actually those same targeted practices. So it's these practices here, I'm just displaying them differently. So if we go into this, I can show you it's the exact same layer. So I just brought in the second layer and named it differently and went into the properties of this. So I went to the symbology. So the main thing, a lot of times it just comes up with this, you know, features, well, and you have categories, but I want to do quantities. I want to do graduated symbols. You also have other options. You have charts that you can do, or you can have proportional symbols, graduated colors. You know, you got a lot to choose from. In Arc Pro, you probably have even more to choose from, but we'll just stick with this for now. So I like to classify it out. I go into my classify button and think, okay, well, I could choose, you know, one of these, you know, quantiles, equal interval, but I know, let's say I want to set these different scales here because this is what I'm going to focus on. Man, if we can really get to this, you know, 1500, that's what I really want to look for. So I want that to stand out. So classify that out and have the different color symbols, and I just go through and, you know, change the colors, or you can change the shapes however you want, whatever is going to make the most sense to you. But once you have that, you then have the targeted practice that then shows, you know, what that actual number is and what that means within it. So I mean, you can go through several different things. We could, let's say, just copy this again and paste it into my layer. Okay, let's see, we want to do phosphorus for this one. So I'm going to go to quantities, I want to go graduated symbols, and I am going to choose reduction. So I'm going to go to my R values, and I'm going to go to, oh, yes, go ahead.
I don't know if Emma's had a chance to, I had to step away for a moment, but there are some severe thunderstorms / tornado stuff going on here, and may have to go to the basement, but please carry on. We'll keep going and recording but Emma and I may have to step away. But
okay, good to know. Stay safe. All right, well, summertime, that's what we, all right, so I'm going to choose the RPQ02, which is the reduction of phosphorus at the quartile level 2, so the median for a 2-year event. So I'm going to pick this, and you can see the different values that come up. And well, maybe I don't want them. I don't want them at natural breaks. Well, let's see what the quantiles are. Okay, well, maybe that makes sense. I could do that manually, or I could pick other, you know, qualifications in this too. But we'll just stick with the quantiles for now. I could stick with the same color. The main thing you want to make sure is this background, that you change that to no color so that it will show the actual targeted practice behind you. Say, okay, you can change this template. You can change, you know, the color if you want. You can go through each one of these and change the color. If I want to change this, let's say I want orange. So you get the point. You can change all this stuff however you want. Say okay. So now if I turn off my reduction for nitrogen, I can see my reduction for phosphorus. And these two areas you can see here are showing, you know, that range, that medium range from 5. Well, so maybe that doesn't make sense. Maybe I want to change that a little bit. So you can go in and change that. You can change these numbers. And you can see here it added the actual index to it too. I want to make sure I grab this out. So then it's displaying, you know, just the two different ones I have here. You can change the heading, you can change the number. You know, it's, I mean, all standard layout procedures. Let's see if there's the data frames. I mean, they're simple. You just set up new data frames. The main thing to get this little indication spot of where things are at, you want to go into the properties and you want to go into extent indicators. So I want to make sure that I have it as layers. So that's referring back to my main layers map. That's going to follow that data-driven page then. And you just change the frame. You can have a different highlight thing on there. So when you go through and do that, it will then go through and follow each indicator here. So if I went to a different page, you can see it goes through here, it goes to a different page, and this changed also. So it just follows along with it then. So I think that's pretty much it for, you know, showing the different, how you can display things differently. Does anybody have any questions on how you display something, or I guess just other questions about some of this data? All right, I will continue on. So I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint then. So we kind of walk through, you know, what this all means, how to go through this different project, setting it up, and some different examples we kind of want to show you. So one of the things is sometimes people like to show charts, how, you know, some people compare to other farmers, how their neighbors compare to each other. So this is kind of a overland sediment erosion comparison that went on. And this one here is showing kind of a little bit of everything. So everything's being portrayed onto this one. You can see those kind of 40-acre catchments are also on here displayed. So this is where you can get some of that data directly coming off the field. So if somebody wanted to get this protection strategy here, you could look at this particular catchment and see what's coming off just for that particular BMP for that area, not a priority resource point. Some other examples are ones, so this one was actually done in Dubuque, Iowa, and they wanted to do parcels. So they wanted to see farm owners or landowners that had parcels that were like all stuck together. So instead of showing each one of these individually, they wanted to see their whole land and what was going on with that. And I guess, Rob, if you're there, it'd be, he was helping work with this project. If you could jump on and give some information on this. Oh, maybe they went to the shelter. So basically what's going on here, they wanted all the specifics. So as we went through each of these, some of these parcels were contained together, some were a little bit like just one or two parcels, but it's a nice way to kind of show a landowner what's going on their whole property instead of just one individual practice. So here's just one landowner. This one is showing sediment risk loss. So where's the high potential for sediment to be coming off the parcel? And as you can see, this is still in Dubuque, but it was just that one farm owner, one landowner, and they only had one parcel going on. So it zoomed in and focused onto that. Some other examples are you can do multiple pages or multiple features and landowners on one. So this is showing, it's all field A, but it's showing several different things at once. So instead of each individual map, you could show all as one. So this is sediment detached from the entire field. So where is the bad sediment area, that's draining? What's the C factor for that particular area? What's the length times slope factor, so where is the highest slopes? And then sediment mass delivered to the field from the edge of the entire field. So this is where, some more different sediment information can come into play. So that's kind of wrapping it up there. Does anybody have any questions? I know Rob and a few of the other people are probably in a shelter someplace at this particular point, so I'd appreciate if you have any questions to speak up.
Yes, this is Jeff here.
Hi.
In terms of your sediment numbers that you just showed, does that take into consideration distance from the drainage network as well? So it's not just an erosion factor, but it takes into consideration those areas closer to the stream have a higher probability of ultimate delivery?
Yeah, so this is actually coming from one of the raster layers that's within PTMAP. So it's sediment at the flow line. So it's taken into consideration in doing some statistical analysis behind the background. It takes that raster and basically looks at the top 25 critical cells within a particular area. So where is the highest amount of the highest amount possible that's coming off? There's more information. I wish Drew or Rob were on here because they would definitely be able to dive into the details of how that raster is created. But it's essentially created from Russell, and there is some travel time that is taken into consideration with that also, as we do have that as one of the main inputs behind creating these. So the answer is, in a short, yes, there is some of that in consideration. As to the in-depth details, that I'm not as familiar with. And
Okay.
that'd be, but we could definitely get you some more information on that.
I'm glad that it takes into consideration proximity, because a lot of the past models just showed raw erosion and claimed it was sediment delivery. Well, it was erosion. It wasn't sediment delivery.
Mm-hmm.
So at least it sounds like to me, or at least you're trying to get there. So that's good.
This is Clark.
Hi.
Hi. Hey, I had a question about how well this might integrate with Conservation Desktop, for example. Are there ways to export or import or whatever to save data entry time if we're doing planning on one or both?
So I'm not as familiar with that particular tool. So I guess if you could enlighten me on what are the main things that go into that, and I could tell you if that is possible.
Well, this is definitely a question from the unenlightened, but what I can tell you is it's the planning tool. It's based on ARC. It's an Esri-based product.
Mm-hmm.
It's the planning tool that's used by NRCS, and it's the one they use to draw the boundaries for fields and indicate conservation practices, and it sort of automatically produces the various reports that they need. And so we use it with IDOLs too, sometimes when we're doing planning in the offices out here in the field. So just wondering if that, how they integrate it together.
They are not currently integrated together to my knowledge, but it's one of those things where they're all Esri products, right? They're all shape files, they're all rasters. So depending on what the inputs to that particular tool are, I'm assuming you could, if they're needing an import of a particular shape file for a particular BMP that you might have, that definitely is, put out through the IAP. You got ACPF and PTMAP data. So that's something you know, if that's a requirement, you could definitely use and take that from there and put it into that tool. It really just depends on what the qualifications are and what you're putting in, but I would assume there's a lot of information coming out with this IAPA data that if it's an Esri product of some kind, there's going to be a connection there. It's just dependent on how that tool particular operates, and I'm not as familiar with that tool.
Okay, thanks. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? All right, well, just kind of wrapping up on this. So, you know, there's a lot of different ways to display data. You know, it's how you're choosing or what you're choosing as the driver for that data selection. You know, are you trying to reach particular goals, or are you trying to reach out to particular farmers first and then seeing what, you know, putting BMPs on that, you know, land will get you to your goal? You know, like we kind of discussed, using parcels versus, you know, the field boundaries that come out of like ACPF, because the ACPF boundaries are, those field boundaries are from like 2008 or something around that time period, so they're really old. But then again, the parcels show sometimes, you know, like an actual farmstead. They're not showing just the ag land. So you have different things to contend with there. If you're doing just a small amount, like let's say you want to reach out to just 10 different farmers, you could select those particular, you know, fields and just make your information maps, you know, just based off those. Or you can do what Dubuque did and decide to send it out to the whole entire county that has farm owners, which was like 4,785, which was a lot, but that's something that they wanted to try to reach out to many people as they could. You know, so there's lots of different things that you can do. It's just starting to think through, you know, we went through workshop 1, 2, and 3, pulling out that data, you know, really targeting those different practices, and then looking at return on investment. Well, now it's, well, what farmers are even going to cooperate with me? So I might have some really good return on investment on a particular field, but that farmer wants nothing to do with me. So is it really worth pursuing that particular BMP? You know, so just really starting to think through that process. We've had a lot of different clients that before they even get close to doing this, they're sending out, you know, particular farm outreach, like a particular person that's going around to every farm and, you know, starting to develop that relationship with them. So by the time that they get to this, you know, a farmer will actually talk to that person. That person can go out there and take that thing and say, hey, you know, what you doing today? We want to discuss this, you know, or here's some options for you. We know that you're really wanting to look at grass waterways. Here's some things that we think can help. So there's a lot of different ways to approach it, but it's always going to come down to the landowner and what they do or what they're willing to do.